Good day, everybody, and it's Calxiyn here, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe for more RWBY videos, and this video is brought to you by my patrons and YouTube membership members, so thanks very much for their support. Today we will be discussing the Hunter's Children from the RWBY fairy tale book, and this has some very interesting lore bits, if the semblance inside of this book are real, so let's just jump in and analyze them. This story starts by explaining there's a huntsman who has 2 daughters and 2 sons, which can get a little bit confusing, but I'll try my best to, differentiate them, because there's eldest daughter, eldest son, younger daughter, younger son, and so I wish they had names, sis. Just give them names. I don't think a lot of the characters in the fairy tale book had names, actually, when you really think about it. But anyway, so they're in the kingdom of Mistral, and they're in a swamp, which is very interesting, because, we haven't really seen a swamp in the show. I'm imagining, that Avatar episode where we go into the swamp. So there's some Grimm here, which, I don't even know how to say some of these. Largotodiles, which sounds like a crocodile Grimm, and stuff like that. There's Grendels, which is actually a thing from an epic poem. I looked it up, and the poem is called Beowulf, which, that's funny. But apparently it's technically unclear from the poem what he is exactly. He's just a monster shrouded in darkness. So I don't know exactly what he is, but, the picture on the wiki, he looks like Bigfoot. So I'm just gonna go with that. I'm gonna go, we have a crocodile Grimm, we have Bigfoot. I guess that's fine. We have long tongues, which are poisonous, so I'm guessing they sound like snakes. I don't know. And then we have will-o'-the-wisp type things. They're just called wisp, but again, that reminds me of will-o'-the-wisp, which I first saw in Brave. I don't really know anything about them. It's that, if you could change your fate, would you? It's that, Merida, whole, thing with the wisp, right? But the wiki says they're basically, the souls of, lost people doomed to wander the earth by the devil, and the devil gives them a single burning coal or something, and that's what the souls use to lure travelers into the swamps and the marshes and all that stuff. So yeah, if anyone knows anything more about will-o'-the-wisp, I'm sure we could talk about them forever, but again, Brave, that's all I remember. Sort of mischievous fairy soul creatures type thing. So I wonder how they would look in RWBY. But I don't know. Anyway, so hopefully we'll get some art for the Grimm. Now the townspeople hunt for food, but this huntsman hunts for Grimm to protect the town, and in exchange the people of the town basically feed him, feed him and his children for protecting them. So that's fun. His children often ask why he's the only one to hunt the Grimm, and he gives a bunch of different answers. So he says his aura is stronger than everyone else's, his semblance tells him when Grimm are near, so that's an interesting semblance, right? He hates the Grimm for killing their mother and not being able to be there when she died. There's a lot to unpack there, but all of them prompt a different discussion by the kids. So the very first one, on how strong aura is not enough on its own, that'll come back later. Right, how it's used to shield yourself and to activate your semblance, right? That's consistent with what we know in the show. We've talked about aura a lot in RWBY and all that stuff, so it's very interesting that this huntsman is aura isn't everything, but I do have the strongest aura, though, so that's pretty fun. Then we find out that the semblance discussion, that the eldest sister semblance will lead her to whatever she needs most, which is weird. That's kind of a weird one. The older brother can link people's auras as long as they're in physical contact. That's the really cool one. The younger sister can calm any human or animal, and the younger brother can hide in plain sight. So are these semblances real? I would say probably. The eldest sister one is a little weird. Oh, damn, I lost my keys. Better activate my semblance and, find what I need most. Find what you need most. Isn't that so, abstract of a concept? What if you need love? What if you need, a boyfriend? Is it, oh, yeah, let's lead you to a man, you know what I mean? The need most thing is a little weird. But yeah, the older brother one kind of sounds like it could be, Jean, if Jean evolves to that point, right? We know that semblances evolve, so that sounds like something that Jean could do if he, wishes hard enough and stuff. The younger sister and the younger brother's semblance basically are, 2 different halves of what Ren has, so I feel like that's realistic. The younger brother, it sounds like he literally turns invisible, that no one can see him, right? Whereas Ren can only not be seen by Grimm because he's just so calm and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting, right? As for fairy tale conventions so far, we have dead mom. Okay, we'll talk about that. We also have kind of rule of threes going on, because there's 3 different answers in like what the huntsman says to his children. It's basically aura, semblance, and dead mom. Those are like the answers, right? But we mostly have rule of 4s in this fairy tale, which again, the 4 kingdoms, the 4 teams, the 4 schools, all that sort of stuff. And we'll actually talk about that later, because there is some interesting stuff that may be going on with the rule of 4s and these 4 children specifically and all that stuff. Dead mom. I've spoken on this a little bit already. Yeah, so the mortality rate was just not great for women giving birth, like back when our real world fairy tales were created. And a lot of the times, like, families would be blended because, you know, women and men would have to remarry to survive. Men would have to remarry so they could have more heirs to, like, work on the farm and all that stuff. You know, like, you need more children to be, like, more hands, and basically do free labor for you so your family can survive. So the men would have to remarry, but also if women were sort of left, like, they can't have the farm or something like that, and so they would have to remarry too, all that sort of stuff. And that's why in so many fairy tales like Cinderella, like, there's a step-sibling dynamic accompanying the dead parent thing, because that was the reality, especially for poorer people. Like, parents died, and then you just need to replace them, because that is how people survived back in the day when these fairy tales were being made. And, you know, that's why we have, like, equally, we have dead dad, right? Because the dad dies, oops, right? The dad dies, and then, you know, they take up the mantle of the family in a sense. And that's also a pretty popular thing in fairy tales, like the kids being left alone, having to survive by themselves, or having to take up some sort of mantle, and all that stuff. So yeah, now they're basically orphans because the dad's dead. He doesn't come home. We don't know what happened to him. He was just killed by Grimm, I guess. But all the siblings, like, disagree on how to do this. The older sister wants to defend their home, so basically, like, doing the whole father legacy thing. The older brother wants to help people in need outside their village. The younger sister wants to study the Grimm, because obviously she can calm herself down enough that they don't bother her, you know? And then the younger brother just wants to go on an adventure, and they split up. Now, in a sense, like, I feel like that 2 things are going on here, right? I think that we'll talk about this more at the end, that each child could represent a kingdom, right? The younger sister wanting to study the Grimm, that seems like a representation of Atlas, like seeking knowledge, right? The older brother wants to help other people outside of the village, and that reminds me of Vale, specifically Vale coming to Vacuo's aid when it was being bullied by Mistral and Atlas, like in the war and stuff like that. The younger brother wants to seek adventure on his own, and I feel like that sort of reflects like a Vacuo sort of mindset. And then the older sister wants to defend their home, and I feel like that could be Mistral because it's more of like the traditional mindset, but obviously I feel like you could switch those last 2 around and it wouldn't really like matter, like Vacuo defending their home in the war. That's also a big thing in RWBY Before the Dawn, and so switching those like wouldn't be that big of a deal. Like Sun basically rallies everyone to fight for Vacuo, like actually fight for your home, don't be complacent anymore. And so yeah, the fighting for your home could be a Vacuo thing, but yeah, I don't think it matters. It's one of them, right? And I feel like that you also have Team RWBY reflected here, which is kind of interesting. Like the younger sister who wants to study the Grimm sort of reminds me of Blake. Like, you know, obviously Blake was sort of like the book read, like one and all that sort of stuff. The older sister who wants to defend their home like their father did reminds me of Weiss wanting to continue her family legacy and the legacy of her grandfather. The younger brother reminds me how Yang wanted adventure and thrills, which he says in volume 2, whereas the pure desire to help others in need is like the older brother and RWBY, basically. So basically, younger sister who wants to study, that's Blake. Older sister who wants to sort of like take up the mantle of what her father left behind, that reminds me of Weiss. The younger brother who just wants to go seek adventure or something, that reminds me of Yang. And then the pure desire to help others, that reminds me of RWBY.
Hi guys, so this is me editing. This is what I look like when I'm editing, guys. Okay, so I just had like an epiphany. I saw a meme. We don't need to talk about the meme I saw, but anyway, I saw a Narnia meme, and I was looking at these kids, and I was like, wait a minute, like, could they be the 4 siblings in the story? Because you have eldest brother, I think his name is Peter, you got eldest sister, Susan, you got youngest brother, I think that's Edmund, and then you get youngest sister, which is Lucy, and I was like, like, could they be based off of Narnia? And so I looked into it a bit, like, listen, guys, I watched Narnia once, it was for religion class, because it's, like, heavily, like, Catholic influence and like Christian influence, but I looked online And so what I found is, like, people online are saying that Susan is courageous, right? And she's the eldest sister. And the eldest sister in this story is the brave one, right? And so basically Susan is courageous, apparently, according to the internet. And then, you know, the eldest sister in the fairy tale story, she is brave. And so that's sort of like an interesting thing. They basically said too that, like, Peter is just a strong leader. Like, I don't know, like, I'm just assigning heart to him just because the eldest brother in the story has heart. Like, I'm just hoping that this all makes sense, because again, I don't remember much of Narnia, but like, he's basically the only one that I haven't assigned something to, and so like, if everyone else has theirs, Peter like must be heart, like the eldest brother in the story is heart. I mean, being a strong leader, you gotta give your heart to the people. Like, it probably, I don't know if this makes any sense. Then we have Edmund, right? And so he's the one that, I remember this, he's the one that ate the Turkish delight, and so he's the one that like was a little bit power hungry and all that stuff. And so, you know, the brother in this story gets humbled by the end, and like, he's supposed to be humility. So like Edmund getting humbled, I guess you could say, getting knocked down a few pegs after he tries to betray his siblings, right? There's no betrayal in this fairy tale, but you guys understand, right? Like, that could be like, oh, like both of them are supposed to represent humility and being humbled after like sort of wanting a little bit of power, you know what I mean? Or thinking that they know best, like stuff like that. And then the youngest sister, the one that studies the Grimm, she's supposed to be wisdom. And then Lucy, I'm seeing people say online that Lucy was the one like that had unyielding faith in Aslan, and I would put that as like wisdom. And so like, I know it's a little bit of a stretch, I don't know if this makes any sense, maybe if you've seen Narnia it would, but like, to me, I'm like, okay, each one of these kids reasonably fits in. There's 4 of them, like there's 4 of the siblings in this story. They all work together and like, you know, use their strengths together and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that it was interesting, but I did think that it was interesting that online, like, people are saying like Susan becomes a courageous queen in Narnia, right? And so I'm like, oh, courageous equals brave. And then with Edmund and all of that stuff, I was like, well, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of that. If you've seen Narnia, like, I kind of feel like they're based on Narnia. That's basically all I'm trying to say, is that they are based on the kids from Narnia. Now, the older sister protects the village, but a lot of people just fucked off. They're like, all right, this man's dead. It just be like that sometimes, right? They, like, basically leave and find a new home because there are a lot of Grimm attacks. They're all mourning this man in the community that they lost. Emotions are high from losing that huntsman, and basically the town is being attacked. So they're giving up. They're leaving. They're finding a new town. Even though the sister has stayed here to protect it, they want to find a new town. The older brother goes to 4 villages, and the 5th one is under siege. And so, again, we sort of have a rule of 5 things going on, which seems to be more of like an E.C. Myers thing than a fairy tale thing. Like, fairy tale is 3, RWBY is 4. For some reason, there's like a rule of 5s in The Warrior in the Woods, and then this one specifically that I can think of, right? And so basically, he convinces them to link each other together with a rope to combine their auras and save the village. And you guys may be wondering how exactly this aura semblance works, because again, it's like the older brother is like making like, I guess one big sheet of aura, right? Like, amongst all the people if they're physically attached. And so here's basically my idea. Everyone has an aura number. Let's just pretend from 1 and 10 in terms of strength. So say you have 5 people linked together and their aura numbers are 2, 6, 10, and 4. So 22 divided by 4 is 5.5. Now, obviously, the person with the strongest aura does get less, but it benefits the group as a whole because they all have like one like stronger aura that is, you know, covering, I guess, like the circumference. Like, I'm imagining basically like a big shield, right? And so now everyone has sort of equal strength. Like, it's a stronger wall. Instead of a wall being 2 in some places and 10 in others, it's better to have a 5.5 wall. You guys understand what I mean? That is how I personally see it. It benefits the group as a whole. They can continue using their semblance to fight against the Grimm if they have aura, right? So that's another thing too. Maybe the person with 2 aura has a really powerful semblance, and so if you give them 5 aura, they'll do better, right? And so I would think about, like, you know, Jean being able to spread his level 10 aura between Nora and Weiss, for instance. Like, that's what I would sort of be thinking, right? Like, you know, Jean has like the strongest aura apparently or something. So imagine if he gave some to Nora and gave some to Weiss. And so
I don't know what their aura levels would be, so I can't put out a number, but you know what I'm saying? Like, Weiss has this incredibly strong semblance, so even if her aura isn't as strong as Jean, right, they'd all sort of be stronger because of, like, the division between them, if that makes sense. Like, all of their numbers combined together would equal, like, a higher number, maybe. I don't know if that's how that works. A higher number overall, right? The younger sister builds a treehouse and studies the Grimm, so she calms herself enough to stay undetected, but she's finding it's not really helping because they're passive, they're not attacking, and so the information isn't, like, doing a lot for her. The younger brother got lost as soon as he left home, and basically the way that his semblance works, this is really funny, is that to be invisible, he has to keep his eyes closed, so he can't see either, and what that personally reminds me of, it's a very, like, you know, I think it's in the Bible, but there's another, like, myth too. Oh, it's Orpheus, yeah, Orpheus and Eurydice, like, you know, Orpheus, don't look behind you because, like, Eurydice will get sent back to the underworld and all that stuff, and he looks behind him anyway. That's sort of how this semblance sort of reads as to me, sort of inspiration from those sorts of myths, and then it happens in the Bible, like, don't look behind you or you'll turn to ash and all that stuff, or something like that, right? And so, the fact that he can't see, like, if he's invisible, he's basically safe from all the Grimm, but if he's so scared that he opens his eyes, he could be in real danger, and so it's one of those, like, trusting things, if that makes sense. The younger sister saves him and they get back together, so that's good. And they basically start to realize how each one of them has their strengths and their weaknesses, and that they need each other, and that they would make a better team if they were all working together. The older sister is found by the younger siblings, and then the older brother comes home with all these people from the village he saved, and they're able to, like, destroy the Grimm and stuff, right? And so they all admit that they shouldn't have gone off on their own, and they're all stronger if they stick together, and so that's a very, like, Team RWBY separating and coming back together in Volume 6 type of thing, or Volume 5, basically. I mean, Blake was, like, at the tail end of Volume 5, but you guys know what I mean. And they say, father was killed because he was fighting the Grimm alone. We work much better as a team. And they go out into the world with their bravery, heart, wisdom, and humility. And again, this reminds me of characteristics of Team RWBY, right? And so, again, I don't know which one I would assign to which. Like, I would say, like, it's hard. It's hard when you describe it as bravery, heart, wisdom, and humility, but I would go back and see the words that Blake described, like, Weiss, RWBY, and Yang as, and maybe that would sort of help. Heart, I feel like, would be RWBY. Humility, maybe that would be Weiss, like, she's been knocked down a couple of pegs, like, not being, like, the snobby heiress anymore, basically. Bravery could be Yang, and then wisdom could be Blake. Let's just pretend and say that. Ozpin says that the story is very similar to the 4 student teams at each one of the Huntsman Academies, and he says, one wonders if the King of Vale had this story in mind when he established them after the Great War, which is basically confirmation that he did, because we know that the king was Ozpin, right? So Ozpin is basically saying, yeah, when I was making the schools, this is the fairy tale that I really liked. That's basically what he's saying, right? And Ozpin also says this, the lesson learned by each one of the children might also serve as a guide for the leaders of Vale, Vacuo, Mistral, and Atlas. Surely 4 kingdoms working together can accomplish more than each one of them alone. And so that sort of reinforces my idea of each child sort of, like, supposed to be representing the kingdoms and all that stuff. And maybe the story never happened, right? Like, I think the semblance are realistic, but say it never happened. I do think that Ozpin sort of took it and, you know, made it into a metaphor for all the kingdoms and used it for the schools and stuff like that. And so it's basically confirmation that Ozpin used this fairy tale as a guideline for him making the schools back then, right? And I do think, like, maybe the semblances could be at least possible. Like, I think that if semblances do truly evolve, like we have heard about in the show, you know, Jean and Ren could particularly expand their semblances to have the capabilities that these character has, because the semblances that they have are very, very similar. But yeah, that is all from me, guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.